Today we'll be talking about the Chaco phenomenon and why everything is Mississippi. Sorry, I don't mean these Chacos. I mean these Chacos, or at least the Chaco Canyon. So what we're really doing today is we're covering the major Native American civilizations in what is today the United States of America. Obviously, in case you don't know, it's not as if anybody knew that the United States was going to be a thing, and so you don't have civilizations that really recognize the future reality of these borders. Now, I'm going to put out something that is incredibly profound. Desert. Now, if you've ever been out into a desert or have spent about 5 minutes watching either Star Wars or the Dune series, then you probably know that building in the middle of the desert is sort of like playing Civilization on legendary or deity mode difficulty. It's not something for the faint of heart. But what if you just don't really have a choice? Well, you have to make do with it. So the civilization that we're talking about is a group called the Anazasi, who are considered the ancestors of the modern-day Pueblo people of the American Southwest. Think basically New Mexico, Arizona area. So the largest of these population centers, at least early on, was located at Chaco Canyon. And the Anasazi would construct these big 5-story underground buildings called kiva, K-I-V-A. And these buildings could hold roughly 800 people. Or more. And so this allowed them to have a population of about 15,000 people. And of course, that means that their construction industry, their stone cutting and masonry was incredibly sophisticated, which is something that we also associate with most of the Mesoamerican civilizations. So they lived in the area for about 350 years, starting around 900 CE. So they declined around the 12th and 13th century, and just like most civilization collapses, it's a result of, a combination of different things. So drought, gee, wonder why, overpopulation, and finally warfare. So how they basically sustain themselves is that they used irrigation systems and also hunted and traded. What's interesting is that we've seen burials where tribal elites were buried with things like feathers that probably came from macaws. Just so you know, you can see lots of things in the desert. Tropical birds is not one of those things. So it's more than likely that they had trading ties with either civilizations or ancestral, the Toltecs, for example, or civilizations who traded with civilizations that were sort of located near the Toltecs. So this is called the Chaco phenomenon. No, not that Chaco phenomenon. This Chaco phenomenon. The canyon is the phenomenon. They built an extensive network of roads. I mean, it's not as if they just built this extensive sort of urban center and then turtled there for, 300 years. They built these roads, but we don't really know the purpose. And here is where, once again, Native Americans get shamed for not having beast of burden, nor wheeled wagons or flatbeds. Also, yes, they had not unlocked the power of the almighty llama or alpaca. So, unfortunately, the Chaco Canyon phenomenon died with the abandonment of Chaco Canyon. However, it does get a sweet sequel. Mesa Verde, which literally means green mesa in Spanish. So the Anasazi decide to sort of almost one-up themselves by not building a canyon in a canyon this time, but instead building on the side of a cliff. So once again, we see an impressive urban center that could probably house thousands of people. They literally built this underneath a cliff. Now, to a certain extent, that may have been the point. So there's a question as to whether or not they built in this location because it provided some sort of military protection. There's maybe some speculation that it provided spiritual protection. We just don't know exactly, but it seems like a very defensible position. So most of these buildings were 5 to 6 stories tall, and the community basically existed by trapping rainwater in cisterns. Just like the Chaco Canyon community, however, Mesa Verde gets abandoned in and around 1300. So it probably isn't around for a terribly long time. And we're less clear as to why Mesa Verde is abandoned. There's some speculation that it could be drought, lack of overall resources, violence. We're not sure. Basically, once again, we have the stereotypical ending where they mysteriously disappear and it must be aliens. But put that in your notes. So this is the part where you learn that everything in the eastern United States is pretty much Mississippi. Or rather, it's part of this civilization that we call the Mississippian civilization. Now, this civilization doesn't share like a common language necessarily because, of course, Native American settlements are very divided. You have a number of different, or hundreds, if not thousands, of different dialects, but we can sort of establish a common denominator, a common foundation that most Mississippian tribes have in common. Mississippian tribes basically stretch from the Mississippi River, who'da thunk, all the way to the east coast of the United States, the Atlantic seaboard, in other words. And it basically comprises most of the tribes stretching from Illinois, Ohio, down to New Orleans, to the Carolinas, to parts of like Pennsylvania. I mean, just all over the place. What they share in common in general is these things. They like to build some mounds. These mounds were probably used for religious ceremonies and sometimes burial sites. Now, think about this. It's hard to sort of see, but if you look closely, you can see that sloped terrace design. And very often in many of these Mississippian communities, you would have worship of the sun. And there's some speculation that maybe this is something that they share in common with a lot of the Mesoamerican civilizations. So we saw, for example, a raised stone structure that was terraced in Teotihuacan, which was, of course, used to worship the sun. So there's some speculation that maybe that wasn't just limited to Mesoamerica. Maybe that culture, maybe those traditions spread northward. There are some other things that we associate with the Mississippian culture, extensive trade networks, extensive use of pottery, and basically political and religious power tended to be concentrated into the hands of very few, if not just really one person, the chief. In a variety of different languages, the chief becomes a figure called the Sachem, Sachem, and they would serve not only as religious figures, but also as military leaders of the tribe. Unfortunately, they leave no written records behind, but they do have an extensive archaeological record through communities like the Cahokia, excuse me. So just to give you guys an idea, Cahokia was actually bigger than the city of London in and around 1250 CE. Population was about 30,000 people. And usually Mississippian communities would have one sort of major urban center and sort of like spokes on a wheel. They would be orbited around by these smaller villages. So these civilizations were fairly urban, and they had a diet based around maize, foraging, and they supplemented their diets with, of course, hunting. Cahokia was abandoned around the same time period, around 1250, and again, we're not quite sure why. Maintaining a population of about 30,000 people would be difficult in any context. So we speculate maybe climate change, maybe some overall population pressures, having too many people to sustain, and of course the most pleasant part of urban planning, problems with waste disposal and food distribution. So that brings us to an end of our discussion of Native American civilizations in the Western Hemisphere. Um, Remember that if you're looking at the settlement of planet Earth, basically Native Americans are the ones who settled the last chronologically in terms of, human civilization as a whole. That late start means that in general they are comparatively isolated compared to, let's say, the Mesopotamian civilizations, or, for example, the Mediterranean world, which is also very, very interconnected. But that's also why I really enjoy studying these Native American civilizations, because they're so different from what we've come to expect in Europe, Africa, or Asia. So in Europe, Africa, and Asia, because everything is interconnected, writing very quickly becomes a known quantity. The wheel very quickly becomes a known quantity. But because of the isolation in the Western Hemisphere, you sometimes get just very, you know, out of the box solutions to problems. Like, for example, the Inca coming up with a series of knots for their record keeping, quipu. That's not really something that, as far as I'm aware, we really see developed in any other part of the world. Unfortunately, this civilization, or these civilizations, will be permanently altered by the arrival of the world's worst navigator, Christopher Columbus, and his friends. But that is a story for another time.